Glad to be with you guys. Thanks so much for talking with me about this major update coming to Hunt Showdown, something bordering on sequel size, I think I'll say. And already we're seeing lots of new aspects of the environment here. Even the trees look different. Colorado has a different kind of forestry around it that makes a lot of sense. So, what informed the direction to kind of take the game here as a location? What does this do for Hunt?
Yeah, so really for us, what we were looking for is what's the next expansion outside of the Bayou that kind of fits the core theme of what our game is. And we knew throughout all of our player feedback and as well as internally, what we really wanted was to really push the boundaries of what we're capable of doing. Right. And so what I mean by that is we had player feedback that said, hey, we really like the verticality in a lot of the compounds, right? Like, Evan, as you've played this game, you're familiar with it. Some of our best moments are rooftop to roof type gameplay, right? And so we wanted to capture a more extreme version of leaning into verticality and leaning into this environment that has more slopes, more verticality, and just an overall different scene that we think is a fresh experience inside a Hunt Showdown and really captures, the essence of us while also saying, hey, this is a new way to play Hunt.
So let's talk about these mines. So, my understanding is these mines are going to connect certain compounds. Like, how does that work in terms of layout?
Yeah. So in the center, a big focal point for us was in the center of our maps, we know that that's where all of our players funnel into. And so we kind of wanted to flip the experience on its head and say, hey, we're going to have two mines in the center of the map. And around those mines, there will be compounds that you can get to. So we have a north mine and a south mine. The north mine will connect you to certain compounds inside of there. And then there is a gap between the two mines, which also has two connecting compounds as well. That leads you to the south mine, which then leads you to another compound. So think of the heart of the map. You have compounds around the edge of the mines, and then you have a connecting route through the mines, which gives you a little bit more safe traversal. But at the same time, you're losing the information that you would normally get in our maps like Stillwater or any of the first three maps. Because when you're in the middle of the map, you normally have more information. You have more audio tells, and you have crows, and you have all these elements that kind of inform you where you're at. But when you're in the mines, you're taking the chance of saying, hey, I'm getting less information, but I'm more safe to travel.
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, there are, of course, some underground environments in certain compounds in Hunt. King Snake Mine is sort of a much smaller version of this. It's much more spacious than I expected. And I guess, so how many compounds can you reach through the mines, if that makes sense? Like, do they spit out to 3 or 4 of them or more than that?
Yeah, so you can connect directly to 4 compounds inside of there. Yeah. And so 2 of them kind of back up directly into the mine, and then there's some that are a little bit more on the outskirts. But when you're going through these mines, you'll see signage for La Plata Mine or O'Donovan Stone, and that's pointing you in the direction to the closest compound that's right there. But La Plata Mine is one that's right on the outskirts, whereas O'Donovan Mine is right there. And so you get a full connection. So you get to be sneaky, you get to go through the mines, and then boom, you're right at the compound looking at the boss lair.
And what sort of combat encounters are you anticipating in the mines specifically? Looking at it, it seems like a great opportunity to stage ambushes.
What we originally thought was, okay, well, how many people are actually going to use the mines early on in playtests, right? Because, you want to be able to get into the combat, and people really like the gunfights in our game. What we see from our playtests and how everyone seems to be enjoying it is a little bit of a hide and go seek kind of experience where you go into the mine and you can set up some traps and you can really catch people off guard, but it's very safe inside of there. So you can peek out, look at a compound, get an understanding of if any threats are there, and then go back in and then reposition to get a different angle. So it's a little bit of hide and go seek, lots of trap gameplay, but the most important part of the mine, and all of our Hunt players know this, is normally when you get caught in a position in Hunt, it's very hard to get away from your opponents. You're normally kind of a sitting duck, but in the mines, because there's a lot of different routes and it can lead to a lot of different areas on the map, you're actually able to reposition and flip the experience. So you have more time to heal, you have different advantage points, and you can kind of turn the tide on the enemy team if you get caught.
Can you say anything about the updates that the existing maps will get, after the facts?
This is our most polished map we've ever shipped, and it's a big leap forward for us on visual fidelity, both on Gen 9 consoles, but also on PC as well. And so as we were going through this map, we identified all of the assets that we were able to up-res and also just redo because we have a higher budget because our engine can support it. So all of our maps are going to be getting the similar love. So there is major updates coming to our existing, like maps 1 through 3, that'll be brought to the same level of visual fidelity. And in a couple of them, in like map 2 is a good example, we are looking to intentionally make gameplay changes to some of the compounds to kind of alleviate some of the pain points that our players have expressed to us.
As you prepare to introduce this map in the big update, what is the initial configuration of the maps going to be? Like, will I only be able to play the new Colorado map?
Yeah, that's correct. So for the first 30 days of our update, you will only have access to the Colorado map. And so it's called Mammon's Gulch. So I got to get used to saying Mammon's Gulch versus Colorado. That's when you've been under the hood for a long time. That's what happens. So you'll be on Mammon's Gulch for a full 30 days. And then after 30 days, we will release the Stillwater Bayou map. What we know from hunt maps is it takes hundreds of hours to really understand a full map because they are 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer with 16 compounds inside of there. So giving people more of a focused attention on the new map is actually beneficial for the players, but also very beneficial for us so we can understand, hey, what's meshing well with you guys? What compounds do we need to look at based on player feedback to see if we can make any adjustments?
So Scott, at a top level, what kinds of behaviors and experiences did you have in mind as you guys were building this map, right? I mean, Hunt is wonderful because it can accommodate solo stealth sniping and like people that play really loud and just running with shotguns and melee weapons, right? Like it makes room for that spectrum of experiences, right? But I know, of course, that like you guys have had some thoughts around stalemates, for example, in the last couple of years and how you manage that, I guess, as a type of behavior. So like what were kind of those big behaviors or experiences you had in mind as you built this map?
Yeah, I'm going to touch on the stalemate part because I think that's the most interesting of what we've done here across all of our compounds, right? So if you look at the history of Hunt, what we've done to all of our maps is maps that have, or compounds that have very few choke points or very few entrances and exits from them, we've kind of tactically increased how many options players get. And so for Mammon's Gulch, what we said is, hey, we're going to make sure that every compound has 6 meaningful entrances and exits for attackers and defenders. And so that's kind of like a loose rule with 6. Sometimes you get a little bit less, but ultimately the main goal was provide more entrances and exits for attackers and defenders to take into consideration, while at the same time saying, hey, we know that we want to increase the engagement between the two, but we don't want it to be too attackers friendly and we don't want it to be too defender friendly. So try to strike a nice balance between that. And what we see is stalemates can get broken a lot easier now because players are able to get out. But at the same time, it's also a lot harder to defend. So if you try to turtle up, if you don't bring traps and you don't fortify correctly, it is a game changer. So we are seeing more traps get used across the board, which also informed a trap change decision with how players can actually place traps.
It seems really exciting that like that system in particular is going to be pretty flexible, it seemed like. Yeah. But are there like particular limitations around it? So you wanted to avoid like, I don't know, players doing something truly, I don't know, like evil with how they place traps, you know what I mean?
Brutality and Hunt are pretty synonymous, so we leave it up to the player's creativity as to how far they'll push it with the traps. Now, we do have constraints as to, which way, how the trap placement does work. What we feel really good about is them being able to go across windows, across the board. So if you go through the window, you trigger the trap. That feels really good. But we haven't seen anything too game breaking or punishing inside of there. And internally, we have a lot of trap placers. David, the GM, is notorious for placing 1 million traps, and I hit every single one of them when I'm on his team. And it always gets me. And he's like, Scott, I pinged it. And I'm like, I know, but I missed it.
Yeah, we've all had that teammate for sure who's a little zealous about
yep, that's me.
Loading
give
up
me
the
the
compound.
action. Yeah.
So it looks like we're on a ridge here. I'm seeing some train tracks.
Yep.
Talk to us more about the kind of particular biomes or the feel of these areas.
What we really wanted to capture across the board was this feeling that when you're on the mountain, we want you to feel like you are on the mountain. Now, you still have places that you can hide and all those elements, but what you're seeing right here one of the biggest changes that we've made to our forests is that they're dense forests, right? When you see these pine straws and you see all these like needles, right? These needle trees, it makes player detection a little bit harder. And so you have to be more cognizant of, okay, what's around me, where the players could be, what sound is triggering, which also informed our decision to say, hey, we need 2 new sound animal attractors. So we actually introduced bats and we also introduced cows. And so when you hear a cow, you're like, oh, okay, players coming from this spot, I know that's where the cow is. And you kind of learn that over time. But, I'd say key element for us was we wanted to capture the feeling of what it was like to be in Colorado and how we can lend itself very nicely to Hunt Showdown gameplay. And at the beginning, we had very dense trees and it didn't create the best gameplay experience. So we kind of trimmed them down. And then we started intentionally opening up more sight lines so snipers would actually have a pretty good time playing on this map, because before, you can imagine when you look at all those trees, like sniper players, like what line of sight do you actually get on people? So we made intentional decisions to kind of make sure that play style was very prominent here.
Right. I mean, certainly with verticality and those long sight lines, it feels like you guys are really accommodating sniping. But likewise, with the introduction of bullet drop, it's becoming a little bit more difficult in some ways. So, am I thinking about that the right way? You're sort of like you're not pushing sniping to the side or even anything close to eliminating it as a behavior, but it has this new dimension, literally.
Yeah, correct. It's got sniping has a whole new experience to it. You have bullet drop that you have to take into consideration. And then in this biome, the other thing you have to take into consideration is, sure, you might actually get this sight line on the enemy team, but because it's a longer sight line, do you have the ability to actually push your advantage after you've downed that player and then be able to wipe out the team or burn his body, right? And what we see throughout all of our playtests is a lot of players, like if you intentionally want to snipe, you have avenues for that play style to work, but you have to be deliberate with it. And that's the key for us. We want each of these play styles to be deliberate. And when you accommodate this landscape, we also need to make sure that players who are running only melee options, if you want to run just the katana with Berserker, you have the ability to take deliberate decisions and deliberate pathing to be able to put the advantage on your side.
I'm guessing above the mine, there is traversable area for players. So if, for example, somebody has a bounty and they run into the mine to get to an extract and I can track them above ground, right? I can sort of go run in parallel with them. Do you think that's a viable technique that you had in mind?
Yeah, for sure. And so the hard piece there is, the balance that we wanted to strike is, if you choose to get the bounty and you go through the mine, you're going to have a direct shot and you have the advantage because you have the direct shot because you're under the mine. If you're above and you're running around the mountaintop, you might have to take a little bit of a detour. And so you get this cat and mouse game of okay, where's the bounty carrier going to go? Are they going to continue to go south? Or are they going to go right? I know they have 3 exits. How am I going to take advantage of that?
And you mentioned bats a little moment ago. Certainly those noise hazards are some of my annoyances in Hunt Showdown and a really purposeful part of the game. Do bats only appear in the caves or the mines?
Right now, yes, that is correct. We have aspirations to put them in more places, like inside of certain buildings to give you additional sound cues right now, but the bats in the mines just feels like such a slam dunk for us from a thematic sense that's where we put all the focus on. And candidly, you need a little bit more distinct audible call outs when people are leaving the mines because you have that covered.
How would you compare this map to the other maps in the game? I mean, we've heard about verticality, but in other aspects, it's more what and less what, might you say?
I'd say map 4 feels completely different than any map that you've ever played inside of Hunt Showdown. And so when you take into consideration the biome and all of the verticality, the dense forest, the new compounds, and a lot of our compounds we've actually built fundamentally different. We actually changed the DNA as to how we construct them. Before, you'd have a traditional compound, right? You'd have an outside perimeter that would have intentional holes, and then inside of there you'd have the boss building, and then you'd have some satellite buildings inside of there. What you see in this one is we actually have what we called internally kind of like mega structures in a couple of them, where you have to commit to the area to then be a part of it. So I'd say this map more than ever is your loadout determines how you're going to play the map very intentionally. Whereas, if you play in the other maps, if you take a sniper, you have a lot of different angles that you get to take. and you can put it to use generally anywhere. On this map, it's very intentional as to what you take. So if you take a sniper, you're going to choose different routes than if you were to take a shotgun or even a long ammo weapon in general, right, without a scope. You have a little bit more verticality, and you have a little bit more, and you have the mines in the middle. But you have these routes that you can take that are a little bit more covered than what you're used to in our existing maps. You have more surprises, right? So you have a lot of more emergent fights that happen in areas that previously would be underutilized in our other maps. So it's really, you're kind of always, it's pulling a lever almost as to when you're going to get into engagement and how it's going to work. So more surprises, more intentionality in your loadout, more intentionality on audio and how you approach any one decision. And then for, the verticality piece, this is one of the coolest compounds that we did. It's Quarry. So it's our take on a pit map. So very similar to any of the undergrounds that we've ever done, but we intentionally built it to say, okay, what are the problems that we have with our underground layers, and how can we build around that and really fix it? And so this one, you have a lot of options. And so you have a building on top of you that you're able to fortify. You can also leave the compound, but because it's more tight and constricted and it's in this quarry, you can also fortify this better than almost any other compound on this map.
Yeah, I mean, looking at this footage here, it just seems very big. I mean, I know, like, I've put hundreds of hours into the different areas already in Hunt, but like, I don't know, somehow this seems larger.
It's way more grand, and I'd say, Stefan Heinrich and the entire art team on this map have done such an incredible job of capturing how big this world is and how far we can push it. And that's a big shout out to our engine team for giving us the ability to be able to do that. So we wanted to push the boundaries across the board. We wanted to feel bigger than what it is. Even though the dimensions of the map are the same, we want players to feel this sense of verticality and this intentionality behind it to drive all of their decisions.
How is performance so far on this map been for you guys from a technical perspective? Because I know you're adding DLSS, for example.
Yeah, so I can just say, like, we've kind of exceeded all of our expectations as to what we thought we would be able to get on this map. And that's mostly shout outs to the new engine for us, empowering us to be able to do that. But performance is as good, if not way better, than our existing maps. So
right here, we're seeing what looks like a mining facility, or is this an example of one of the mega structures you talked about?
So this is Oro Gordo mine. And so right here, when you think about like traditional Hunt compounds, right, you can kind of see a perimeter here, but this structure backs directly into the mine. And so when you enter the boss layer, you also have a direct shot into the mines, but that also means you have to be cognizant of the mine that's right there. And so this megastructure connects, it's kind of like an L shape. So this what you're seeing isn't necessarily the boss building, but it's connected to it. And so inside of here, you can take a lift to go across, or you have to choose a route that's a little bit more risky and puts you exposed.
At a top level, it feels like this isn't like too out of line. It's obviously like 16 compounds, which I think is the same as the other Hunt Showdown maps. But we've got this bird's eye view. Can you kind of talk me through the design direction of what we're seeing here? I can see the railroad, for example, threading through a couple compounds.
So one of the biggest changes that we made from a design direction side is in maps 1 through 3, we have this terminology called POIs. And POIs are compounds which always give 2 clues, essentially. And in our existing maps, what we would do is we would say, hey, the two clue, like the POIs would always be in central locations, right? But you want to, and so we do that because everyone has a fair opportunity in order to get there. We flipped that on its head for Colorado, and we said, hey, we're actually going to put the POIs on the outskirts. So Preston Oil is a POI that features 2 clues, as well as Gasworks and Miner's Folly. Those 3 all have 2 clues inside of there. So those are POIs. And what that's done is that's kind of changed how players play. Because in our existing maps, you have that moment where you're like, oh, okay, well, I can skip this first compound, go to the second one and get 2 clues, and then that changes the way that you play. Whereas in this one, if you spawn at Kingfisher Foundry in the bottom middle, you might actually just go left to Preston Oil to go ahead and get 2 clues. And that changes your pathing, and it changes your decision making as to how you want to approach any one decision. So that was a big part of it. But from there, it all started with our anchoring statement of we wanted to have mountains in the middle, and those mountains need to have mines. And so we started with, okay, let's create 2 mines. We're going to create these 2 mines and these mountain ranges in the middle. And how can we mold everything else around that? And does it play well?
I guess I'm also wondering, are there any compounds that have, or maybe you can just sort of talk about one as an example, like where the adjacent compound has an interesting relationship to another compound beside it?
Really a big focal point of the engagements happen between O'Donovan Stone, La Plata Mine, Oro Gordo Mine, and Split River. Okay, so those are the 4 in the middle. Okay, now Montero's Malt has a line of sight on O'Donovan Stone, but O'Donovan Stone can see gasworks, for example, and they can also see the crossing of people going into Montero's Malt. So if you spawn Grizzly Lodge, you're like, cool, I go to O'Donovan Stone. Now if I'm playing a sniper, I'm watching that cross, and that's intentional for me to be able to do that. But really the whole core of fast rotations and being able to get good lines of sight on players ends up being between the 2 mines, because that is an elevated position. And so you can very quickly move from Split River to La Plata Mine. And that is a big game changer for us as to how people play and how they position, because there is a strategy that we see inside of our playtest where people will just go into the middle and then they set up control around that. They fortify the mines to the best of their ability. And they're just playing to the strength of their loadout to say, okay, well, I got one clue. I know it could be in La Plata Mine or it could be in Split River. And now we're going to just see where people are coming from, and they get the advantage from that. The other thing that we did was basically right between Deadfall Timber, La Plata Mine, and Kingfisher Foundry, there is a watchtower, and I think we can see it in the video. I forget exactly where it's at, but there's a spot that you can see this, the iconic Hunt Showdown watchtower, right? We put that on a hill. And when you're in there, you can see Deadfall Timber. You can see a direct line of sight on Deadfall Timber. You can see almost all of La Plata Mine, and you actually get to see Kingfisher as well.
It seems like from what we've seen of the mines, you've not tried to make them too bottlenecky, right?
Correct. Because, yeah, that was a bit. We learned that lesson early on in playtesting. Mm-hmm. The more choke pointy it was, the less likely players were to go in it.
Yeah, I mean, that can be intimidating unto itself. Like, it seemed like there was a lot of choice available to me in terms of diversion and sort of losing people in the mines in a good way.
So La Plata Mine is another one of our mega structures. So this one is basically one giant building that sticks together and has a bunch of different meaning. But the other thing is depending on where you approach, it's either you're fighting all the way on an upward angle or you're fighting down. So if you come from the mines, you're at the highest point of elevation of this compound, and you are looking down and you're seeing every area down to the left. Whereas if you come from here, you're fighting up. If you come from the lower end, you have a very good idea as to where your enemies can be. But if you come from the higher side, we want to make sure that, well, you might not have perfect information, so you have to be more intentional with where your sightlines are, and you're more exposed. So higher risk to come from the higher verticality, lower risk to come from lower. So this, we see tons of engagements happen in and around this area. So this right here, you get to see this. And so if we pause right here, if you don't mind, this is La Plata Mine. You have full view over this, and you also see the entrance from the north mine that comes out, one of the entrances. To the right, where those pine trees are, that is where the south mine, one of the south mine exits are, as well as the one right over to the right. So you are gaining a lot of intel here. Right over this hill that you see in the back distance, that is the connective part to Split River. And so this whole area ends up being this massive contention point. And when you get a one boss contract and it's in one of these 2 mines, or one of these 2 compounds, whew, good luck, man. It's a hoot. This right here actually does a really good job of capturing the exact feel that we wanted to get, which was, we have these scaling mountains, we have this big world with these massive mountains.
Can players expect any maybe Easter eggs? Obviously, you've had some that refer to movies in particular.
We love the exploration part of this, of the Easter eggs, but the team, as soon as we wrap up, we're always like, hey, what can we do that's pretty cool from the Easter egg perspective that can surprise and delight our players who are really looking for them? So there's a few for sure.
It's been interesting because I've been in the games industry a while, and I've heard many games kind of use verticality as a kind of talking point and piece of identity. And of course I understand what it means, but I guess like from a game design perspective, what is it about verticality, about these kind of z-axis designs, right, that like makes a game like Hunt more interesting? Like functionally, what is it doing for me as a player, with my teammates and with my opponents?
Verticality is good when it's intentional, and by being intentional, I mean if your game's design lends itself well to it, you can lean into it a little bit more. And for Hunt, Hunt is a sandbox title, right? We want players to bring whatever tools and weapons that they want to bring into the map, and they have to solve the puzzle of how they kill the boss and get out their own way, right? And so for us, more options that we give the players that are meaningful, the better. And what we want to do in Hunt is make sure that, okay, verticality. Obviously, if you have the higher position, by default, we learned this from Star Wars, you have the advantage, right? And so for us, we know that the more reward you get, the higher risk we have to put on it. And so for us, when we look at verticality throughout our levels, especially inside at like a per compound basis, we say, well, if you're going to take the vertical position, you're going to be more exposed. And in a game that's one life, where you lose your hunter if you die, you have to make a very deliberate decision on, is your hunter expendable, or are you good enough to be able to pull it off? So for us, I think it leans into the high stakes that we always want to achieve, which is to say, here's a problem, how you want to solve it is your choice. And I think that's one of the most powerful pieces of what we've done here in Mammon's Gulch, but also just in Hunt Showdown, is we're not prescriptive. We're not saying this is the only way you can play. And the more options we give our players inside of the map, the better it is for them to experience and continue to pour thousands of hours into the game. So I'd say that's really like my key, is verticality for us really just lends itself so well to who we are and what kind of game it is. Because as you add more verticality, you get more sound cues, right? It's not, we aren't doing jump pads or adding these other elements that allow players to get onto verticality with relative ease. There's a cost. So any decision that you make has a cost, and that cost can be consequences, and it can also just result in your death. So sure, you might be able to climb a ladder and get into a high spot, but now you're on a roof, and also the ladder was making all this noise, so people have a better idea of where you're at.
The game has always been one where seeing is a skill, right? The ability to spot players in different environments, different lighting conditions even, is something that you can bring to the table as a player. And yeah, that makes me wonder a little bit about weather conditions and how you see them interacting with this map.
Yeah, so, at first we're going to start off with, 3 times a day, kind of the traditional. We have 1 nighttime and then 2 daytime maps. And then from there, we're really excited to get fog into this map, as well as thunder shower. We think thunder shower is one of the most dynamic times a day that we have, and we think it has played really well on this, but it's not quite ready to ship with it on launch. So what we don't know, and I'm excited about, is which ones we want to try on this. Well, one of the fan favorites has been Inferno, right? Now Inferno could flip this entire experience all on its head, but we haven't gotten to that point yet. But that is a conversation that I'm very interested in having.
One of the things I've always enjoyed about Hunt is that it does not hold a player's hand. I think in almost all aspects of the game, like, you guys are really trusting players to make their own fun, to kind of come up with their own strategies and tactics. But of course, there are aspects of the level design that are subtly conveying certain ideas or approaches. Can you maybe name some of those that players may not realize? Obviously, like, when you put a light on something, or something is bright compared to what's around it, like, that is drawing your eye toward it, I think, in most situations.
Yeah, so, obviously lighting is a big piece. Pathways around the floor, like dirt paths or mud trails or clearings inside of a forest, those things all kind of intentionally lead the player's eye into it. But the other thing is when you look at our levels, one of the things that we try to achieve is as you're just walking, like really good level design ends up feeling like a flowing river, right? Which means, when you watch a river kind of flow, you watch it kind of move around the rocks and kind of form to it, and it's very smooth and intentional. We always are looking at, hey, how do we stick together these two pieces in a way that makes sense for the player? And when you see here, right, like just in that moment as you were walking down, you can chart two direct paths around this individual mountain pass, right, or this little rock formation, right? You can either choose to go over to the right because you saw that there was a path over there, or you can go to the left. And these tiny little decisions need to be conveyed and they need to be clear to the player. And we want to reveal them at the moment where they will make those calls. Because if you reveal it too early, it's kind of information overload, But when you reveal it at the right time, you're making the player say, okay, I can make a choice. When you enter a compound, we want players to be able to make a decision of, I've committed to breaking into this perimeter. Where's my next move? What's the next tactical decision? And some of that can just be a building. Some of that can be medium cover. But that's the key for us, is trying to figure out, hey, what can lead the player to make more informed decisions on position? The other thing when you're thinking about the compounds ultimately is each approach, we call them approaches, right? So each approach needs to be able to fit kind of like a specific weapon in mind. So we try to make sure that all of our compounds have at least a 360 degree, sometimes 270 degree approach points. But those approach points are intentionally designed where we're like, hey, this is where snipers are going to kind of come from, we believe, because of these reasons. Here's an area where it has more dense forest, so shotgun players can go through there. But then you hit a choke point. And so you're going from the perimeter into the compound, right? Each of those choke points are built in such a way where you're dealing with A, animal attractors that you have to deal with. B, you might have to deal with meatheads, right? And then if a meathead's in front of a gate that you already have to open because that comes at a cost, now you have to change your strategy. Or you're like, well, I guess I'm going to kill this meathead quickly with like a dynamite, give my position away and break in, or I'm going to reposition myself. So all of those things add to the mix, and what AI spawns inside of there, it could be an armored with chains, like a wired. It could be a wired. It could be an immolator. All those things are random, and so you always have a different experience every time you go into these compounds, which really changes the dynamic. We don't want you to have one way to solve the puzzle. We want you to be able to always solve the puzzle different ways because we present a different challenge at you.
Well, Scott, thanks so much for talking to us, bringing us through all these details. I think there's surely a lot more here we could spend time talking about. So, looking forward to discovering this map for myself. And thanks again.